This is a Hudson lecture. I'm going to be talking about Latin America in the 19th century. It's going to be a little bit of overlap with the 20th century as well. You'll see that at the end. You'll know when that happens. So basically these are some notes to help you if you're going to be studying for a test or if you're taking a class on Latin America or just a world history class in general. So hopefully this will help you out. You can go take some of the names, places, and events, and you can research more about those and certain websites, certain books, things like that. So I'll go ahead and begin. This is called the Consolidation of Latin America. 1867, Maximilian I, who was an Austrian duke by birth. He was the leader of Mexico. He was killed by a firing squad. So that was in 1867. Name that you're going to hear a little bit about is Benito Juarez. He was a Mexican Indian, and he became president. So it'll be quite a bit more about him later on, you'll see. Latin American leaders in the 19th century favored ideas of Western Enlightenment, private property rights, Republican ideals, and constitutional government. They had beliefs of virtue and progress. The Napoleonic Wars set independence movements in motion. So if you ever wonder why it was that, like, for example, say, like certain countries, like as you'll find out, like Argentina, Mexico, and other countries, why their independence movement spread, well, it was because of the Napoleonic Wars. That's something you may want to research on your own too. Maybe check out a book at your local library about the Napoleonic Wars. Or just go to the index of a world history book and go and read those specific pages. Pretty interesting there. Early movements favored independence. They failed because colonial upper classes were reluctant to enlist the help of the masses. Toussaint Louverture, he was a leader of slaves in Saint Dominique in 1791. Four external events that had a strong impact on political thought in Latin America. One was the American Revolution. Two, the French Revolution. Three, the slave rebellion in Saint Dominique, led by, as I just said a second ago, Toussaint Louverture. Fourth, France's invasion of Spain and Portugal. In 1808, there was a general insurrection because of France's invasion. Father Miguel de Hidalgo, he was a leader of American Indians and Creoles. And in 1810, he was later captured and executed later on. Augustin de Iturbide, Iturbide, he was a Creole officer and the head of the army in Mexico. He was sent to eliminate insurgents, but joined with them and occupy Mexico City in September 1821. He was proclaimed Emperor of Mexico in 1821. So that was Augustin de Iturbide. Mexico became a monarchy. It collapsed in 1824, then became a republic. Argentina and Venezuela went independent first, and Cuba and Puerto Rico were last. So that's kind of some interesting trivia. If you ever make it to Jeopardy, you can remember that. Gran Colombia, it was a merging of Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. It was they had political and regional differences, which led to the breakup. Simón Bolívar, he was a wealthy Creole. He was an officer that became the leader of the revolt against Spain. He won many victories in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador, and he died in 1830. Jose de San Martin. He was the leader of a movement in the Rio de la Plata. I believe that's in Argentina, Rio de la Plata. Porteños. Those are the residents of Buenos Aires. The Porteños pushed for independence because they wanted freedom of trade. In 1816, was the proclaiming of the provinces of the Rio de la Plata. 1813, Paraguay declared independence. Here's something interesting to keep in mind. By 1825, all of Spain's South American colonies had political independence. In 1824, there was the Battle of Ayacucho. It was a battle in which royalist forces were defeated in Peru. 1807, French troops invaded Portugal. The Portuguese royal family fled and made Rio de Janeiro the capital of the Portuguese Empire. After the Napoleonic invasions, Spanish colonists ruled in their own names, and they reinforced colonial relations in Brazil. The Portuguese king, I believe it's pronounced, I haven't taken a Portuguese class, I believe it's pronounced João, J-O-A-O. The sixth, he ruled until 1820 from Brazil. During his reign, the printing presses began, schools were created, and a public library was established. Napoleon was defeated in 1820, so João the sixth left and put his son Pedro as regent. He declares independence in September 1822. Now he's Dom Pedro I. Brazil then became a monarchy. All former Spanish-American colonies became republics except for Mexico. As far as the role of religion goes, the role of religion was a contested issue within Latin America. By 1854, slavery was abolished except in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Brazil. The Dominican Republic gained independence in 1844, and before that was occupied by Haiti. Paraguay was led by dictators. If you ever wondered about Uruguay, if you ever seen it on a travel show, very beautiful beaches. Uruguay was actually formed in 1828 as a buffer between Brazil and Argentina. Andres Santa Cruz, he was a mestizo general that led the Indian populace in caudillos, independent leaders who dominated local areas by force and sometimes seized the national government itself. Rafael Carrera, he ruled Guatemala from 1839 to 1865. He was a conservative caudillo. He sincerely took the interests of the American Indian majority to heart. There was a struggle over a type of republic between centralist and federalist. The centralists wanted to create a strong centralized national government with broad powers. The federalists wanted tax and commercial policies set by regional governments. So that's kind of like the distinction in the U.S. between Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats want a strong national government, whereas the Republicans want it more, state-based. They want states' rights. They want states to have their own policies as opposed to just taking orders from the national government. Juan Manuel de Cusas. He was an Argentinian. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, Mexican. These were men who were able to mobilize the population. The Monroe Doctrine of 1823. It said, any attempt by a European power to colonize the Americas would be considered an unfriendly act by the U.S. Britain replaced Spain as the dominant economic force over Latin America. Latin America became dependent on foreign markets. Guano. These are bird droppings used as fertilizer. They were found off the coast of Peru on islands. And they actually, the Peruvians actually made pretty good money off of getting this stuff and selling it to others to be able to use as fertilizer for their farms and just general agricultural purposes. In the 1840s, steamship lines helped improve communication, and in the 1860s, railroads helped increase internal communication. There was an alliance between landowners and peasantry versus middle class and urban modernizers. Auguste Comte is a French philosopher whose philosophy was called positivism. It stressed observation and science applied to the problems of society. Liberals in Latin America based their ideas on positivism. The population of Latin America doubled to 43 million between 1820 and 1860. Latin America's exports were wheat, sugar, coffee, copper, and rubber. Immigrants from Europe flooded into Argentina and Brazil. The Mexican Republic was established, had a federal constitution in 1924. It was based on the French, U.S., and Spanish constitutions. Liberals had power from 1832 to 1835. This is in Mexico. But they attacked the church, and then General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna took power. At this time, Mexico was unstable and had financial difficulties. Anglo-Americans came to settle in Texas. Then Santa Anna tried to suppress them, and in 1836, the Texas independence was declared. 1845, the U.S. voted to annex Texas. 1846, the U.S.-Mexico War. The U.S. occupied the capital and took roughly half of Mexican territory via the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That was in 1848. One thing that I'm not talking about here was Sam Houston. So that's one person who you may want to get a book on, get a biography of Sam Houston, or maybe go to just use like Wikipedia or some other website and take a look at him. So he's somebody who's pretty instrumental during the time of the Texas independence. Benito Juarez, he lived from 1806 to 1872. He was an American Indian with a legal education. He became governor of a state. He had a liberal vision of secular society. He opposed Santa Anna. La Reforma. It was the liberal revolt that began in 1854. Military and clerical privileges were curtailed. Church property put on sale. Speculators and big landholders bought the lands that were put up for sale. By 1910, roughly half Mexican rural population were landless. Latin America, the origin of the name was when Napoleon III told conservatives in Mexico that we share a common Latin history. In 1862, French forces landed off the Mexican coast and took the capital. Maximilian von Habsburg, he was an Austrian archduke. He took the throne of Mexico and tried to appease both the conservatives and liberals. French forces left, and Maximilian and his son were captured and executed in 1867. Juarez returns to power, and at his death, his general Porfirio Diaz comes to power. Diaz is another person who you may want to look into. He's a lot of times in history, he's considered a dictator or a tyrant, that kind of thing, because of the way that he ruled. A little bit on Argentina. Buenos Aires was a port city. Liberals took power in the 1820s and had reforms in education, finance, agriculture, and immigration. The rancher class power increased because of public land sales. Liberals in Argentina, they wanted central government, and they're also called Unitarians. Juan Manuel de Rosas, who was a Federalist known as a despot, he was driven from power in 1852 by the Caudillos and Liberals. The Argentine Republic was declared in 1862. Juan Bautista Alberdi was a progressive journalist. He influenced the new Constitution of 1853. Domingo F. Sarmiento, he became president, and he ruled from 1862 to the 1880s. Argentina became very prosperous during these times. During the second half of the 19th century, Argentina prospered because of exports of beef, hides, wool. It was politically stable, and it made investment very attractive to global investors. 1865-1870, Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay had a war against Paraguay. Brazil had slaves, large land holdings, and an export economy. Brazilian independence was declared in 1822, and in 1824 it was a liberal constitution created by Dom Pedro I. Dom Pedro I was an autocrat. In 1831, he had to abdicate to his son, Dom Pedro II. 1830s, there was a violent conflict in Brazil between liberals and conservatives. One term you may come across a little bit is fazendas. They were coffee estates in Brazil. By 1840, coffee made up 40% of Brazil's exports, and by 1880, it was 60%. So coffee is a major player in not only Brazilian agriculture, but also just the Brazilian economy. In 1888, Brazil ended slavery. And if you know a little bit about world history, that's actually kind of late. So that had to be, I can't even think of any countries later than 1888 that ended slavery. If you can, let me know about that, because 1888, that's pretty late. The abolition movement began in roughly 1810. In 1850, a quarter of the populace was enslaved. The last 50 years of slave trade, 1.4 million slaves were imported to Brazil. So that's a pretty incredible amount of people who were imported there. The middle class boomed in Brazil. The economy was stable because the... unfortunately, I can't read my notes there. what I'm going to say is that it was a monarchy, and the whole regime was stable because those connected to the regime, they liked their prosperity and their connections to the regime, and so there wasn't any strife or any kind of way to contest power with the ruling family, and so there was stability within Brazil because of that. Brazil was the last nation in the Western Hemisphere to end slavery. Immigrants from Portugal and Italy made it so that Brazil was less dependent on slaves. Agitators of abolitionists and the sympathy of Dom Pedro II helped to end slavery. 1889, there was a nearly bloodless coup. It ended the Brazilian monarchy, and Brazil became a republic. Antonio Conselheiro, he was a religious mystic. He attracted peasants and canudos. In the 1890s, the military was sent in to fight them. One book that you may want to check out to read about that, a little bit about Brazil, is called Rebellion in the Backlands. The book's by Euclides de Canuha, Euclides Dacunha. It was a book that was referenced when I was learning about this, and it seems pretty interesting to check out and take a look at. The 1870s, there's a new realism in the arts and literature of Latin America. In the 1830s, Romanticism was kind of the current theme in the arts. The elites of the new nations adopted the taste of Europe. By the 1870s, women were an important part of the workforce. In 1842, Mexico City required kids ages 7 to 15 to attend school. Exports led to a boom of the Latin American economy. So as I said before, economy of Argentina and Brazil really surged throughout this time. Major exports by country are Cuba, tobacco and sugar; Brazil, rubber and coffee; Mexico, copper, silver, and henequen; Argentina, wool, wheat, and beef; Chile, copper; Central America, bananas and coffee. The War of the Pacific occurred from 1879 to 1883. It was over control of nitrates. Chile was against Bolivia and Peru. You may want to search about that. Mexico's exports doubled between 1877 and 1900. Argentine trade increased at roughly 5% a year. This was one of the highest amounts ever for a country. Foreign investment put industry, transportation, services in foreign hands. There were rigged elections during the time of Porfirio Diaz. I'm actually going to talk to a Mexican friend and see if I can find out a biography on Porfirio Diaz, and even Juarez too. So I'll see if I can recommend you a book on that. The Rurales, they maintained order in Mexico's countryside. The Mexican Revolution began in 1910 and lasted 10 years. It began as a middle-class movement that won electoral reforms, and it expanded to include other people throughout the populace, including lower-class workers, peasants as well. The Spanish-American War began in 1898, when the U.S. declared war on Spain-occupied Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The Panama Canal The U.S. wanted a canal to shorten distance between the Atlantic and Pacific. Teddy Roosevelt backed the Panamanian group that wanted independence in Colombia. So obviously the Panama Canal was in the 20th century, not the 19th. So other than that, thanks for watching. I hope this helps out in your studies or just your general interest of world history. So thanks for watching.